Welcome back, everyone. Today we are joined by Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, a 4 times combat veteran and host of the very popular Daniel Davis Deep Dive podcast. So thank you, as always, for taking the time.
Always a pleasure to be here, Glenn. Thanks very much.
So you have been following the Venezuelan case quite thoroughly or carefully. That is, the U.S. attacked Venezuela, kidnapped Maduro and his wife. And Trump says now that America will run Venezuela, even though the government is still in place, with the exception of the president. Now, how do you assess this whole mission? Because I think the tactical achievements in terms of the going into this was, well, we can't really deny it, that this went smoothly. But before everyone goes and pat themselves on the back, one should address the wider strategy here. What actually happens next? What has been accomplished so far?
Yeah, that's the question that I fear too little focus has been on at all, and that is what comes next. Okay, yes, from a military perspective, taking the morality and the legality out of it, amazing success. Just the way it was conducted was probably way better than they could have hoped for. There was a lot of opportunity for it to go south, and it didn't. You can say that tactically it was a terrific operation. But the tactical operation, divorced from morality, divorced from legality, is by itself a problem. In fact, almost you can say the success is actually could be potentially undermining our own national security into the future. And when you look at the legality of it, especially, there's been a lot of people here in the U.S. today, and really ever since this happened on the 3rd, been bending over backwards trying to claim that this is legal. It's not. It doesn't violate international law. It doesn't violate the Constitution. Doesn't violate the 1973 War Powers Act and all this stuff. And that's just nonsense. It is cut and dried. It is against international law. It is against the Constitution, and it is against the 1973 War Powers Act, i.e. American law. I don't care what Maduro is alleged to have done. I don't care about what he may or may not have done with drugs or whatever else. That's a problem. Let me reflect that. I do care about that, but there are other ways, legal ways to handle it. And that means if you're following the rule of law, that you don't always get to do everything that you want. And you may say, well, I want to just go get Maduro, but there's laws that prevent us from doing that. He is the head of state, whether we think it was legal or not, whether we think the election was rigged or not, that's not even relevant. He is the president of that country. He's the legally recognized president. If there's a problem inside, the people of Venezuela can figure that out, just like the people in our country could figure out, was the 2020 election illegal or not? No other country could come in and set that right. We did it ourselves, and we handled that. And we obviously, January 6, 2021 was an ugly day, but we handled that too. Now, just imagine if somebody had used that as justification to say, oh, American democracy is falling apart. We can't risk all these nuclear weapons falling into the wrong hands. We're going to have to come in and set that right or something. Sounds absurd at face value, no less absurd than what we did in Venezuela, because the justification is even thinner than that. Because Maduro and Chavez before that have been in power for quite a long time. His vice president, who's now the acting president, Rodriguez, has also been in office for quite a long time and crossed over administrations, et cetera. So there's nothing new in any of this. And all these claims that this was about narco-terrorism, no truth to that at all. The claim that they're killing, 300,000 Americans, number one, is factually fraudulent. It's not true. It's 75,000 or so, which is a high number, but the number claimed is not true. And the vast majority of those comes from drugs out of Colombia, out of Mexico, China, and India, ironically. Most people aren't aware of that. Those are far, far more involved in actually the lethal overdoses that we suffer. Hardly any of them come out of Venezuela. So there's no truth to that. That's the first thing here. And then the idea that we can just go and take the leader of another country because our courts have indicted him back in 2020 is, again, just ignoring that international law exists. And there's nothing in our law that says that because we have indicted somebody, we can just go seize them by force of arms and kill 40 people in that country in the process of doing so. If you do that, then you have to say, well, then how do we tell Vladimir Putin that he can't go and seize Volodymyr Zelensky? because he's convicted in their courts, he's a terrorist in their courts, or somebody else, and any one of quite a few countries can say, hey, look at Benjamin Netanyahu. He is an accused war criminal. He's accused of genocide. No, can someone just go into Israel and capture him, or if he's in some of these transits somewhere that they capture him midstream or whatever? I mean, you can see people will say, well, good luck trying on that. Maybe so. But the precedent has been set categorically that we now say, if your country, your law indicts somebody, which is different than convicting, you can just go seize them by force of arms. How can we now tell any other country that they can't do that? We can't. We have forfeited all kinds of moral authority here in what we've been doing. And then by openly declaring we are taking physical control of the company or political control of the country by saying they either do what we say or we're going to kill them, more of them, and taking physical control of the oil that we're threatening to do. And if we don't get that control, then we'll go back in with the military force. That is the behavior of a thug and a dictatorial power. Now, people don't like to hear that in terms of the United States, and especially Americans, it will just get the fur up on the back of their neck. I'm sorry you feel that way. Our actions demand an accurate assessment of what we're doing. That's where we are, and I worry that Trump has been laying all kinds of word that we might be going into Iran. It could be coming in next. Colombia, Mexico, Greenland of all places. There's the target list seems to keep expanding, and people keep on talking to him, telling him on American television, yes, you're right, Mr. President, keep going. I mean, at some point, Glenn, I worry that a bunch of other countries may finally start banding together and saying, we have to work together militarily or they're going to come after us. And I think the chances for global conflict are just going through the roof right now while people are cheering and celebrating.
Yeah, on the legal aspect, this insistence on referring to it as arresting Maduro. You can't seize a president of another country and refer to it as an arrest. And I like that comparison, because if courts in Venezuela claim that Trump or Hegseth or Rubio are criminals, it doesn't make it legal for them to go in and snatch their leaders. It doesn't make much sense at all. But international law, though, it does have a function, especially in the area of war. That is, if in the game of war where we essentially kill each other, everyone has an interest in maintaining some international law to restrain some of this, create some framework around curbing the excesses. But what do you see being the major ramifications now? Because if this is the new thing, there's not even any attempt to hide behind some liberal democratic, pretense for, supporting democracy. If it's just about, well, this is our oil, we want it back, or these are narco-terrorists, or, he's not a legitimate leader, we will choose who's legitimate, we will run the country. Once international law is demolished in this way, how will other countries begin to act besides, as you said, seek to perhaps collectively balance the U.S., which isn't in America's interest, of course?
And, I'll tell you, I worry that the president may be thinking, look, we just demonstrated that we can go in with this really crisp operation here, kill a bunch of people, take what we want here, suffer no casualties, and then we're just telling you guys, the rest of your country, your vice president and your other people who are in ministry powers, y'all better fall in line or we're coming back and doing more. Now, going in on about an hour and a half operation to snatch and grab one guy and get out is a very radically different process than saying, I'm going to use military force to compel compliance with a political objective and the system of governance on somebody else. You've got to have boots on the ground. And I'm talking hundreds of thousands, not 15. A whole bunch here, and you've got to have all the infrastructure that goes along with that. And if you try to do it on the cheap and just say we're just going to launch a bunch of bombs and they don't comply and they don't submit, then what are you going to do? See, I worry that Venezuela may say, you know what? We're going to resist. If you want to start bombing us, we hope you don't, but we're not going to submit to this. Even if we have to go to war with the United States, if they calculate, Glenn, if the leaders of Venezuela calculate, you know what? I'm looking at the balance of power. I'm looking at how much you're already extended in all these places, the Russia-Ukraine war, the Israeli fights against all the people they're fighting here, this $11 billion you just given to Taiwan or committed to Taiwan. I don't think you have the capacity to go into a war with us. I think that you'll shoot your wad pretty quick and then you won't be able to go any much further. And I think that we can weather that storm. If they calculate that and say that we're willing to pay that upfront price that they would definitely pay from our initial barrage of missiles that would fall in there, we can't do this. So if Trump's bluff is called here, we'll be in a world of hurt, I'm telling you.
Yeah, I often refer to Trump as the president of low-hanging fruit. That is, he makes big threats, like in Panama. I thought that was efficient. Again, not moral or anything, but just threaten that we're going to take back the Panama Canal by force. And then Panama will have to, I guess, counter that by offering some concessions. And then suddenly, they pull a bit away from the Chinese. They offer some concessions to the United States in terms of transit. And it's one can claim victory on, at home, saying that, well, in the past we're in decline because we had weak leaders. I'm strong. Now we're winning. But again, you can only play this game so many times before the rest of the international system begins to wake up and begin to take action. And of course, being too successful, as you suggested, it can come at a price if it emboldens the Trump administration further. And
Yes.
I thought it was interesting that he hardly finished this mission in Venezuela before he referred to possible something being done against Colombia, but then also Greenland, as you said. Why do you think Greenland was connected so closely to Venezuela? Because many of the people in Denmark, they were, they not applaud, but they give their stamp of approval for what the U.S. did to Venezuela. But when they see themselves being compared that we should do something similar, then by taking Greenland, they're very offended and they start talking about the international law as if this is a very important value to them. So why do you see Greenland fitting in at this moment in time?
For some strange reason, and we can only speculate, but someone must have gotten into Trump's ear early on and said, man, we need to take Greenland. It's not enough that we have military bases there and had a good cooperative relationship with Denmark and Greenland. That already existed. It's been there for quite a long time. But someone said, no, that's not enough. We need more. We need all the control of it. And somehow Trump said, yeah, let's do that. So we can only speculate why someone got in his ear. But what we do know is that succeeded. And now that he's just become obsessed with this, and this was early in the administration, and it kind of went dormant for a while. And then he stopped talking about it, all these other things that were happening in the Middle East, et cetera. And I thought, okay, well, that just, passing fancy he didn't keep his focus on for a while, left. Well, now all of a sudden, I think whoever put that in his ear the first time got back in his other ear and says, okay, now then, because of this precedent we've set here of going into Venezuela, we've proven that we are going to take action. So now we can go back and threaten again to take Greenland. Maybe they'll just do like what Panama did and just give it to us, and we won't have to take any more action with that. We'll just have to threaten it as so. And, and is that what they're doing with now talking about destroying Cuba as well, or with Colombia? That sounds a little bit more action. And in fact, on Air Force One last night, Trump was asked about Colombia, and they point blank said, are you saying there's going to be military action against Colombia? And he said, sounds like a good idea to me. That's about as close as he would come, but that's pretty straightforward. Yeah, I'm thinking about that. And then, the same issue with Mexico. They've been talking about that for a long time too. My big fear is that once you get a lot of this stuff in your mind and you start thinking everything I do succeeds, I got the Panama Canal, I capture Maduro here, I'm going to pressure all these other countries in South America, and now maybe I can get Greenland for nothing just by threatening. You just keep on being more and more emboldened and thinking that you can't fail. And of course, that's just potentially catastrophic of overreach. And then I'm telling you, all it takes is maybe it's Venezuela. Somebody just bow up and says, you know what? I don't care what you're going to do to us. We're not going to give in. We're going to fight. Or if Denmark says, you're going to fight us if you try to take Greenland, something like that. And then all of a sudden, now then we get stuck into a situation we either have to take an embarrassing subordinate position and walk away from it, or we have to do even worse and say, oh, well, now they've called my bluff, and now I'm going to have to punch them and hit them hard. And you see the whole international community, the whole way that the world has been together since the end of World War II could just come shattering apart. I mean, there's a lot at stake here, in my view.
So if you would make a prediction, where do you think the Trump administration would go next? Or like, what is the wider strategic approach here, which is directing it? Is it this idea of another Monroe Doctrine that has to prevent other great powers from having not the colonies, but economic ties and a strong footprint? What is the logic?
I mean, look, the Monroe Doctrine was initially targeted against European countries and saying, y'all stay out of our hemisphere, so that leave these countries alone, to protect the countries around. That was the Monroe Doctrine. It wasn't for us to have control of them. Now it's being perverted and turned on its ear, and we're the ones who want to now have dominance and control, physical control over the political entities in South America. And that's a perversion of the Monroe Doctrine, the Trump Doctrine, or the Don Doctrine, or whatever he's twisted that into. It's weird, and it perverts what actually was the case in the past. And when you say you want to know what's next. I mean, it looks to me like that we're going to like be gleeful to try and suffocate Cuba to death. It sounds like that Marco Rubio is going to now use the leverage that it appears that we're going to get anyway with Venezuela to stop all of the petroleum that they had been given to Cuba, and to destroy the regime. We've been doing this since 1962 when we first put sanctions on them, and then Castro and all that went off that in the 60s, and now then it's just like, well, that's just what we do. And it is beyond absurd, and it's just insulting when I hear a bunch of like former NSA officials, when I hear other people claim that Cuba is a threat to the United States. Glenn, I've been to Cuba. I went on a Christian trip with some churches in the area, and they can barely eat. They barely have food. They don't have a military even worth the name. And to claim that that's a threat to the United States, or that the communist government that exists is a threat to the United States, is a humiliating embarrassment, because they're not a threat to anybody. They can barely hang on right now. There's no reason why we should have all these sanctions on them, and yet you see them lusting after the thought of finally destroying the communist regime in Cuba, in Havana. And then we see the same thing going on in Colombia. And I think that, probably you asked what the next one was. The next military target, may well be Iran, because, with Netanyahu just coming here just a few days ago, Trump was looking back again to Iran and saying, hey, we may have to knock them down. When you look at military power, I suspect that might be the next one, because one thing you got to understand about what happened with Venezuela here is that this was, as General Kane mentioned, months into preparation, and we saw, I think it was beginning in August is when we started having that military buildup, and then that culminated here on January the 3rd. If you're going to do something else, either militarily with Cuba, which I don't imagine we're planning on doing, I think they'll just economically try to strangle them to death. But if you even think you're going to do anything in Mexico or Colombia, you're going to have to keep all that combat power there, and you're going to have to add to it. And then you're going to have to start doing a new set of rehearsals, which we saw some of those being done, even out in the open there. But to do that, and to possibly do something in Iran, we don't have the force for that. We don't have the ammunition. We could seriously get sucked into wars that we cannot handle. And I pray that neither one of those things happen, but that's my concern. First with Iran, and then secondly with something, if those ships and everything stay there, then I worry about something in Colombia or Mexico.
It's so against its own, counter intuitive, or it's counterproductive, because if you look at a country like Colombia, I've been there many times because I have family there, and they're almost like a bit of Poland of Latin America. They've always been very close to the United States. They aligned themselves, but now, even if they get a new president leaning the other direction, there's going to be a huge part of the country alienated after threatening to attack it. Same as Venezuela. When you remove a president, you also fuel a lot of resentment among the population, and even people who are critical of Maduro across Latin America, be it Brazil, are not happy to see this kind of unhinged behavior.
Yeah, and we haven't even talked about Russia or China. China has a lot of investment, a lot of money on the stake in Venezuela, and there's a lot of questions about what's going to happen with that if we get control of the government. And I can't imagine that both China and Russia are just going to be passive and just saying, "Oh, bummer, you beat us again, so I guess we lose everything, and all the investment we've made, we're going to lose that too." I can't imagine them being passive in that regard. So I can imagine right now they're going to wait and see, because so far the regime of Maduro is still fully in charge and fully intact. Only he is taken out, but all of the system and the government they had in place is still there. So a lot is going to depend on what happens in the coming weeks and months about, the government and how much control do we get. But if it starts to harm Chinese interest, I doubt that they're going to take that passively.
Yeah, in terms of unforeseen repercussions, of course, the whole what it will do to America first as well is also an issue of its own. But we're running out of time, so we're going to have to address that next time. So thank you very much for taking time.
Thanks for having me on, Glenn. I appreciate it.
大家好，我是主播周玉琴。很多的朋友告诉我们，太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌帮助了睡眠品质。原版的太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌，它添加有超级食物羽衣甘蓝，健康再加分。而有睡眠困扰的朋友们，赶快选择蓝色包装这一款晚安加强版，绝对是更有感。每日克菲尔，时刻美好 ，Good Feel Good。请上快点购为健康下单，而且要记得输入推荐代码，有额外的折扣优惠。太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌基础版、晚安加强版，新包装改版，内容不变，抽取更方便。要吃就吃最好的。